Renowned R. Right, so welcome everyone to this data training, mandatory data training for secondary school governors. It is an interesting time to join again as secondary school governors because quite a lot is changing. My name, by the way, is Ed Price. I've got oversight of governor support team, but I used to be a secondary school IT teacher in the past, being a school improvement advisor, and I also got oversight of data for the whole of the EAS in the region, hence doing this training. The purpose is really to give you a greater understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the governing body in relation to assessment data in the main. So we're not looking at the formative and how teachers use it in the classroom. We are looking far more at the summative and almost the school improvement type data that can help you as governors. An understanding of the role that assessment plays, but lots on the limits of data as well. So we'll touch on some of the elements in which can be used and should not. An awareness of the way it's changed significantly. I will give a brief history lesson going back as 1986, believe it or not, on what might be available. So when many of us may have been in our schools ourselves. Um, what I will spend about half this evening on is a particular focus on the return of what is known as the Key Stage 4, so age 16, all Wales core data set. We love an acronym, as you probably discovered in education, so the acronym for there for it as well. An awareness of the way in which local authorities, ourselves, Welsh Government, and a touch less in this on some of the tools that schools may use. The key is going to be the All Wales core data set, because that's the bit where there are consistent numbers, for want of a better phrase. The key, I would say, is with all of this, you are not, as new governors, expected to be an expert in any way, shape, or form. It is for the school leadership to be analysing data and presenting it to you in digestible forms, not for you to be analysing it yourselves. Although I know many of you, or some of you, will be, I won't put a number on it, will be data lovers who will want to do things like join standards and performance committees and dig in and find out more about the data. So I'm sure you will have your opportunity to do that at governing body meetings. So that's the plan. In terms of the outline, bit of history, key changes that happened from 2018, because you will be aware we've got Key Stage 4 data, so years 10, 11, pupils age 16, but we used to in the past have lots of Key Stage 3 data, which was years 7, 8, 9, pupils age 14. That has gone. I'm going to explain some of the rationale for that, and ultimately linked to Curriculum for Wales, which is the driver behind all of this change, and some talk of the data available. At Key Stage 3, the information, which you will have far less of as governors, is much more about supporting individual learner progression through their pathway. So, the history, a simplified summary of the history. Before 1987 and the national curriculum came in Wales, there was no consistent data in Wales. There was no consistent data in the UK, because in 1987 it came in the UK. Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister, Kenneth Baker as Education Minister, as long ago as that. And in the UK and continuing in Wales from when Welsh Government took control of education, all learners were assessed age 7, age 11, age 14 as part of initially SATs as tests, as you may have heard of them, up until 1985, and then simultaneously to that, teacher assessment. In Wales, it just continued with teacher assessment. The shock to most people is that there was nothing consistent before that. It's been around for that period, and you're thinking, didn't have any form of consistency apart from O levels, CSEs, and A levels. That was it. Still continuing through this period, broad range of GCSE A level vocational qualifications. And what has evolved, particularly from about 2010, was a broad range of data available in data packs. I'll show you some of those, but I'll show you the real one later on in detail that has returned this year. So used for self-evaluation, but also accountability, and phrases used, lots of benchmarking. I'll unpick a little bit of that later. Comparisons with national, local authority, similar schools, and also trends as well was seen as key, even though it was complex because children change, cohort change, abilities change, and it's not as simple as just defining this cohort should do exactly as well as this. It's highly complex, and it's trying to be fair about it over the years, which has made things more complex. So these are a couple of the examples. That's our old EAS logo. We used to do one based on the local authority ones before, a data pack for schools at Key Stage 3. Those happen to be Key Stage 2 ones on screen, by the way, but they look the same. And we also used to do one, the Welsh Government started introducing one from about 2010 onwards for all key stages as well. They were, the one on the right, 70 to 100 pages long. You'll see the Key Stage 4 one in a minute on that, and you'll see why, because they have lots of graphs repeating all of the different areas. What was assessed, no longer assessed, therefore I'm not going to go through it, are all the individual national curriculum subjects. Of course, now with Curriculum for Wales Change, it is a much more fluid curriculum than these individual subject areas, so you can see why we weren't assessing them. We were also assessing at Key Stage 3, age 14, all learners at the same time, and asking the question, how many learners were getting level 5s, level 6s, level 7s? Now, the levels were defined in each subject area by several pages of what a learner should be able to do at that level. The expected level was level 5, and this is an example. Imagine it's a level, it says level 5 at the top. I just pinched one from a primary pack, but the principles are exactly the same. The school, and you can see the years there, they're a little bit dated, but the school data was presented in a way where the school data was the blue line. So you can see back in 7 years before this was created, 70%, leapt up to 95%, then went down to 85%. You can see that the school data compared with the other lines, which are family, I will explain later, but it's a group of about 10, 11 similar schools, the local authority, and Wales as a whole, there's much more fluctuation. Of course, there's going to be fluctuation because you've got smaller cohorts. Even in the largest secondary schools, you've probably got 200 learners compared with thousands across Wales. You're going to get more fluctuation between them. Therefore, the school would sometimes be above, sometimes be below. So you were looking at trends overall. On that graph as well, I'll ask you a question. You can pop it in the chat if you feel, if you've got access to it, but I'll ask it on the next sort of pause. But if Wales had carried on the same rate, so 7 years ago we were 80%, improving, very consistently improving, strangely, up to about 90%, where would we be in 7 years' time? Any thoughts on that? If people want to pop them in the chat. But ultimately, in 7 years' time, we'd be at 100%. Yeah. In 8 years' time, we'd probably be at 100. Thanks. That's Damon. That's great. In 8 years' time, we'd be 103%, which is technically impossible. So the way in which we were assessing things and measuring progress, and this was very much used for accountability, was broken. Schools were doing everything that they could to get learners to a level, because that's what they were challenged to demonstrate, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing for getting the learner to the next stage in their education. So things like that moved and went. I'll come on to what it's replaced with in a minute, okay? Because it's not replaced with something consistent, and I'll explain why in a minute. Yeah, changing increasing targets should drive continuous improvement. It should, until they become meaningless, I guess, is the issue with that. So governor's revised role, asked informed questions regarding the data, but we can't compare with similar schools, but at Key Stage 4 we can. Ensuring the data is analysed by the school leadership, receiving information on strengths and areas for development. I think that is key for you as governors, that you know that writing of boys when they come into school is one of the key issues, one of the key challenges. Oracy is one of the key issues. Numeracy, what are the key issues in school? Looking at your data, collectively identifying any issues, ensuring the school development plan, and you'll have heard me talk about the induction if you've been on it, the school development plan. And Damon, you're absolutely right, should have targets within it that are appropriate to what we're trying to achieve, and then governors monitoring that progress against the school development plan using the data presented. So that's your key governor role. What I'm going to do at this stage, and I will cut this stage out of any recording. If you want to ask questions, ask questions. If you want to pop them in the chat, pop them in the chat. You can raise hand. I really don't mind. Or if I don't see those questions emerging, I'm happy to move on as well. Pop those in the chat if you want as I move on. If there's anything on the past and what you understand that sort of past assessment to be, or any other general questions. So 2020-21, these were planned anyway, but COVID accelerated everything. The target, the regulations up until 2021, it was actually hard coded into law that you had to assess every child and report the results back, but those were actually revoked. And the line here is interesting, and I'll return to these. Individual schools to determine how best to meet the needs of learners and support progression, and led by the 6 key principles of assessment at Key Stage 3. And I'll return to what those 6 key principles are a little bit later. It was also about schools considering what information they provided from primary to secondary as well, lower down, and those were critical. It used to be, yes, there was dialogue, but there would be lists of this child's got a level 4 in English, 5 in maths, 6 in science, etc. But it's now should be much more about dialogue instead. Key Stage 4 is different because what has happened this year, and it was announced in January 2023, is that up until 2022, measures were suspended because everything was different. I am sure quite a few of you parent governors, you will be aware in the news that we were assessing in different ways. Results were slightly more generous over the years to make up for the challenging times that learners had had. And that was the statement. I won't dwell on it, but the link is there. And they said data for accountability was out at that time. However, in 2023, back in January 2023, data is back in. And I'm going to explain a little bit later on in this presentation the detail of what you get. So that's the Minister for Education and the Welsh Language, Jeremy Miles's statement saying all Welsh core data sets returning. Data is for 2023 only, so no data. Sixth form data would be separate, and that's coming out shortly to schools. And we'll look at in this presentation at the data later because it will be the interesting part to get our teeth into. But I want to return briefly, and apologies in this presentation, it's quite hard to work out the sequencing. I was tempted to go all through Key Stage 3 and then Key Stage 4, but I've gone through the past and now moving on to what's happening in the future. So that's the past. This is now the future at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. Welsh Government are saying that assessment should be about much more than just those graph example. There were hundreds of those types of graphs, but that graph I showed you, to be more about the qualifications-based measures at Key Stage 4, other indicators, national reading numeracy tests, I'll come on to the, or personal assessments as they're called now, and the progress learners are making within schools. This is the diagram that's key part of national curriculum for Wales, not national curriculum for Wales, curriculum for Wales, and the assessment arrangements. I'll explode it in a little minute to go through the 6 key parts. The link is there, will be there in the presentation when it's sorted out and uploaded next week. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to go around the clock from, well, 12, 1 o'clock first to look at progression from age 3 to 16 or 3 to 18, depending on the school. That is key, that progression should be about a transition from primary and secondary. There shouldn't be a gap in between. It's not about assessing learners at the end of primary and passing them on. It's to present that continuum. Some learners may well be behind others at 11, but that's fine as long as they're on the right journey for them in terms of what they are learning and what they're doing, and they've got the skills to access the next stage of their education. The second part, that it must be about learners being at the heart of it and learners understanding their own progress and the progress they're making, which our schools are becoming better and better at understanding and framing that. It should be that assessment's an ongoing process. I do like the phrase, despite the word in there, indistinguishable from learning and teaching. So it's not about sitting tests in halls in a at a particular time of year or multiple tests throughout the year. It's about assessing the learner in the context of which they're working. It should be that assessment informs what you do in the classroom as well. Why wouldn't it be that assessment is telling you things about learners didn't learn that well the way I did that. We need to look at it in a different way. They still need to learn this. They still need to that. We'll go back to it. We'll do it at a different pace. Oh, they found that very easy, straightforward. We've got to put the challenge up and increase things for our groups of learners. So that's the fourth component. The fifth principle is that it's about across the breadth of the curriculum, wide range of assessment approaches, not just using test, about using teacher observation. Yes, using personalized association, a personalized assessment, etc. It's about the learner. And key is about engagement with parents as well and consistent messages of understanding where the learners is. Sometimes in the past, you may have had reports like this, be thinking, your learner can do a level 4 in this, a level 5 in this, a level 4A in this, and you're going, what does this mean to be? So it's about dialogue through parents' meetings, through descriptions of what these mean and explanation, rather than it being just numbers or descriptors. Also, descriptors that are produced artificially through software programs that are too restricted in what they allow the teacher to say to parents as well. So that is the heart of what assessment should be about up to Key Stage 3, about the learner and preparing them ultimately for Key Stage 4 through the richness of what they get, not labelling them on the journey that used to happen in the past. I'm not going to go through every word on that slide because it's a summary of what I've said, really. It's moving away from those nationally required, legally required teacher assessments up to individual schools, but it also says clusters are key here, because why would it not be? Because as a secondary school, you do need the primaries to be working together on their assessment so that there is consistency there. It's schools, and schools have been working on this for a number of years, but continue to do so, about their assessment arrangements to support individual learner progression. It's about assessment being about the individual learner, not accountability in the system, hence removing those summative as opposed to formative. So summative sums up where you are at a point, as opposed to forms the next stage, to ensure that assessment is forward looking and learners continue to build on their prior learning. As the EAS, as the School Improvement Service, colleagues on that side of the service, as supporting school leaders, teachers, clusters to develop their assessment through a range of groups, networks, work with clusters, and that work is ongoing. It may be as governors, and I'll come on to questions for you later, to be asking, how are we involved in that? How do we assess? Are you getting presentations in schools about that assessment side at Key Stage 3? Happy to take any questions before I move on to a little bit of what Estin would look for. Okay. Estin, have to mention them in terms of they will look into schools in terms of their framework. This is the current framework. There is a pilot which is slightly different from this, but I'm working on the current framework as it stands. Inspection Area 1, or IA1 as we sometimes hear it called, is used to be called standards, but it's now renamed learning. It is where in the past they would have looked at lots and lots of data. Now you can see from that list, and I don't expect you to know this inside out, and it is far longer than this, but this is a summary of it. The skills that pupils are learning, they're looking in the classroom, in books, the progress that learners are doing, and they're expecting school leaders to be doing the same, rather than relying on numbers or scores on the doors, that I would call them, for want of a better phrase, at the end of stages. How well individual learners, but how well specific groups of learners are doing as well. So are they making as much progress from starting points as others? Literally looking at the books and what learners can do throughout the school. When it comes to groups of learners, we'll touch on this in Key Stage 4, but boys, girls, free school meals, not eligible for free school meals, are the four big groups of learners that you will get in all schools. Naturally, they are, apart from single sex schools, obviously, where it's just two groups. Um, the free school meals, I'll return to a little bit later, but free school meals, the reason that is chosen, it's a proxy indicator for socioeconomic disadvantage. When we're talking about free school meals, we are not saying that an individual learner on free school meals is limited in what they can achieve, but they're saying that statistically, schools with a higher proportion, the overall outcomes have been lower. And that is, not universally true, but nearly always true. It's an indicator for socioeconomic disadvantage. We're not talking about labels on individual learners here in any way, shape, or form. People have been concerned about it for a number of decades since it came in, but the statistics show it is one of the most reliable proxy indicators for disadvantage. Apologies for the next one. I've got a few acronyms to throw at you, but pupils with additional learning needs, looking at those groups of learners. Pupils with more significant special educational needs as a component part of that. More able and talented pupils, pupils with English as an additional language, looked after children for the lack. Minority groups, you will learn more about these. I don't expect you to remember them as new governors. You will hear more about them in schools, and different schools have different proportions. If it's one or two, you can't look at statistics and data. Even, five or six, you can't look at statistics or data. It's about schools giving you the narrative, anonymized naturally, of how these groups of learners perform, and where there is perhaps relative underperformance or something we're not expecting, there is a context for that. Quick change. I'm threading this one bit on personalized assessments. There's some links when you get the presentation. It is on the existing one, but it will definitely be on the revised one. But personalized assessments, formerly known as national tests, are tests that all schools are asked to do at least once a year, encouraged to do up to twice a year, been available for many years and online since 2019. They're available for all learners in years 2 to 9, so 7, 8, and 9 in secondary schools. They're adaptive. So what this means is they'll start off with middle ranging questions. If a learner finds them difficult and is getting several wrong, the questions will get easier. Then they start getting them right. They get harder again until you find a level. If a learner starts off getting them all right, the questions get harder straight away. So, and this does make absolute sense, no learner is sort of, oh, I've got all of those wrong, gets demoralized. I'm not, I'm really struggling with this. Old tests were designed on that way with easy questions at the start. You may have noticed when you've done them, and they got harder as you went through. But adaptive, they're online, they do that. So also, not every learner sat side by side would have the same question at the same time. No particular window, does focus on what learners can do, but I would be encouraging you to ask the questions. Oh, learnt a bit about personalized assessments. Could you tell me how the school, explain how the school uses them? What does the data tell us? Do we have any year groups that particularly need more support compared with other year groups based on that data? Um, what analysis have you done of them for school leaders? You've got 3 or 4 questions there. As a new governor, I'm not encouraging you to go in and reel off 3 or 4 questions, but could you tell me more about how we use national tests? I've learned a little bit about them. Lovely. Okay. There are a range of other tests as well that schools choose to purchase that they've used for a number of years. They're diagnostic. They help look at individuals and their needs and learning styles. Some of these are sort of contested theories, but many schools like certain aspects of them, and it's free for schools to, when I say free, free to choose, but there are a purchase cost usually. But you may say, oh, do we use any other tests? Could you tell me about them? What do they tell us? And there's a range of other providers as well, but I put a couple of examples there with an acronym warning that they are commercial companies and they have different schemes in the way that they work. Any questions at this stage? Okay. Key stage 4, into the heart of the data. Uh, Test, basically, summer 2023, any exam entries before that. They originally came out in October. That's in a draft form, and they were finally released in December. Hence, we incorporating them into this February training so that they're available for you. The announcement was there before. I covered that off before, that the data packs would be available. They use what's called legacy measures. That's not that helpful for you as new governors, but I will cover what those mean. And what they have also done is refreshed families. I'll explain what families are as well. So let's move on. Families. This is visible when you download it, but basically this is every single secondary school in Wales in rank order. I've got missed off family number 6 for the Welsh medium because there's no Welsh medium schools in those families, but you have got every single school placed, I'll go forward a slide, into a family. All the schools are ranked in rank order based on the data you see in front of you. So free school meals, the proportion of learners on that, the proportion of something called Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation. You can Google it if you wish. I'm not going to explain it in detail, but all it says is it's categorized an area by how socioeconomically disadvantaged it is, then percentage of learners with statements of special educational needs, and then English language or Welsh language where relevant as are put into there. All of those are multiplied together and to give an index to put families into 9 or 10 schools together. These are the 9 or 10 schools. Ask which family you're in. School leaders will be there. I'll fire out some names for you, but on the left-hand side, you've got the Welsh medium schools. So you've got Gwentis Coed in Newport. That is the most socioeconomically disadvantaged Welsh medium school in Wales because of the families 1 to 6. It is at the top of that list. You've then got, notice it changes to orange on the school number. You've got Llanwern High, that is in the most socioeconomically disadvantaged family in Wales, family number 7 for English medium. You've then got all the way up to Baselig School on the right, which is in the least socioeconomically disadvantaged family. Have a look at where your school is. Hopefully you can squint and see where your school is on that list, but you've got the most socioeconomically disadvantaged here up to the top. What's interesting is schools do sometimes change family. If you're looking at, say, moving from family 20 to 21, I'll give a very slightly dubious football analogy, but it's like being promoted from the Championship to the Premiership, to Premier League, and in a way you were then playing against more experienced teams, basically, or schools that have less socioeconomically disadvantaged learners in that are likely, but not guaranteed, to do generally better as a school as a whole, not as an individual. All right, so that's where that comes from. So those schools are grouped together into a family, and a lot of the comparison done against those families. Let's move on to what we're actually looking at. We're looking at 5 headline measures from the Welsh Government that they prescribe, and all of them are points based. I'll explain this on the next slide. They're also the CAP 9. I'll explain that on the next slide. The literacy measure, so this is the best of GCSE English or Welsh language or literature. The numeracy measure, which is the best of GCSE mathematics or numeracy, and then the science measure, which is the best science qualification GCSE again, and then the Welsh baccalaureate skills measure. So those are the 5 main. I'll explain them in a minute. You've then got performance measured against 5 or more A star to A's, so looking at your more able and how well they do. You've then got performance gaps, free school meal, non-free school meal, boys, girls as well, and results against what's called model performance. I'll explain that in a minute because it sounds hugely technical. It's when you get to it, it's not that, but it takes a little while to get your head around. Loads of stuff on individual subjects. an average point score analysis of upper, middle, and lower third. I will explain that to you in a minute as well. So that's really the agenda slide for the next section. This is the core part of it. So the calculating points values. What used to happen, hopefully you can see my mouse cursor flicking around there, was that most schools were judged on how many learners they got to get level 2 grades, 5 or more of them. So what happened, there was a huge focus in schools on moving learners from a D to a C or a D to a B, because that's where the gains were on how you would be held accountable as a school leader. But what happened, if you were already an A, you might not have been pushed up to an A star. If you were a G, you might not have been pushed onwards, because you might only have been capable of perhaps reaching Ds and Es with what you could learn. Therefore, there was this artificial barrier between levels 1 and 2 and grade C and D. Instead now, there are points values allocated to each one. You will notice, I'm sticking on the left-hand half of this slide now, the differences between everyone are 6 points, except for one. And it's not that visible on there. But the difference between nothing and a G is 16 points. So there should be a huge incentive for schools, well, there should have been anyway, to ensure that every learner achieves some form of basic qualification. We know for a fact it improves life chances as well for learners, that if they are even achieving lower level qualifications, it's still better than achieving none at all, which is the point where, different directions are taken in life. You've also got the vocational on the right as well, just as an example of some entry level, really low level qualifications, accessible qualifications, but they're worth an equivalent amount of points as well. So all qualifications valued on a comparable scale. Now, I say that's what the system looks like. In reality, for data leads in secondary schools and curriculum planners in schools, it's a 60 to 70 page booklet explaining it in a lot more detail than that. But for you as governors, that's the key. Remember, points are what matter, and the points, and I'll explain them in a minute, are what's key. It's interesting that 6 is the points difference between them. I'll come on to that in a minute. Cap 9. You're thinking, why Cap 9? It's the 9 best qualifications the learner achieves. The reason it's called the Cap 9 is because up until about 2012, there used to be a, a measure that measured all the qualifications. It was deemed by Welsh Government that perhaps some learners were being entered into too many qualifications, hence maximising the number, so they capped it at 9. The 9 used to, up until 2018, consist of 9 slots. 5 of those slots had to be occupied by those 5 subjects you can see there. So 2 maths, 2 science, 1 language. It was changed, and I think the system was grateful for this, to only 3 slots that were prescribed. Literacy has to be GCSE, numeracy has to be GCSE, science, best of science GCSEs, and then a range of 6 other qualifications, capped at 6 GCSEs, including vocational. This gives schools much more flexibility than they had in the past to offer the curriculum that's right for learners, but still retains a core of important subjects, because those will impact on life chances. You've got some examples at the bottom, so you'll see when I'm talking about the points later of what an average learner gets, you can see that 9 A-star GCSEs, the maximum learner can get 522 points. You'll see an example with some vocational and a mix, 256 points. What we're looking at in the charts we come on to next are the averages. Any questions? Okay. What do the charts look like? by all means, if you want a copy, you're entitled to see a copy of these charts. I would hope it may well have been at a previous governing body meeting that those charts are include that a presentation has been done to share those with you, or elements of them. It doesn't have to be all. School leaders can interpret, explain in ways that are accessible. They do have a consistent 0.0x numbering system that's used rather than page numbers, and I've used that in all the other pages, so you know. The most useful page is on pages 16 to 17, but I'll come back to some of why the numbers and how they're made up. It's about modelling, and I'll explain how they're modelled in a minute. But on this summary page, you've got a CAP 9 score, and what it tells you, number one, is what the school has achieved. Number two, what the school was modelled to achieve based on its free school meals. And then the difference. If all those numbers are positive, and they do happen to be on this example, the school is doing better than expected. If they are negative, the school is doing less well than expected. If they're small margins, it's probably in the chance realms of random chance rather than if they are significant. What these mean, I'll look at the literacy one, top right. The literacy one is 1.4 points above where it should be. What that means is that every learner, and remember that 6 points I mentioned earlier, is achieving roughly quarter of a GCSE grade better than you would expect on average. The numeracy indicator here, 1/3 of a grade better than average. So that's what that tells you. A star to A is slightly different because that's a percentage, but it gives you an idea. I'll come on to it in a bit more detail. So the questions, and these questions for school leadership, of what are the charts showing, why is it important, and querying the data. What are the trends? Which subjects and indicators do pupils do best? What do they do less well? It is asked, these are some of the questions for you for school leadership. How do we compare with local averages, similar schools, any other contextual factors? So those are the questions that we would ask school leadership to be analysing the data and be able to answer, and for you ultimately as governors looking at it. This is some of the context data. So I'll return to that after the summary. The context data it looks a bit overwhelming at first. It puts a secondary school in a grouping. Okay, so the grouping, how the percentage of free school meals, up to 10%, between 10 and 15, between 15 and 20, 20 and 30, over than 30. The reason the Welsh Government do that is because roughly that puts schools into equal groups. You can see your school on the context data of your chart of your pack, and you can see it fluctuate. This, as I describe it, okay, what's happened to this school 3 years ago? I'll use the poor football analogy again. It was relegated to a lower division. However, it's now playing against, well, less well-equipped team, should we say, but it might still be taking some of its good players with it. So you would expect the school to be perhaps doing a little bit better relatively in those performance indicators, but might be more challenged the other way. If you ask your school leaders about it, they will tell you more within the context of your school. This is the real concept, and it's the concept of these charts. I don't particularly like these. These are from Welsh Government. I don't particularly like the ones because they should have a 0 there for me. But what you've got along the x-axis of these charts, along the bottom, is the percentage of free school meals within the school. So it goes from 0 to up to about 60 in this one. You've then got, and again, it's a truncated chart, so it doesn't start at 0. You've got the average point score. Remember I said the maximum a learner could get was 522? So this describes the average learner within a school. Your school is the pink dot. The blue dots are all the schools within your family. Okay, so all the schools are represented by a dot. You've then got the family average, which is right in the middle of the yellow. Okay, you've then got a line. The line is drawn through every single school in Wales. So as you can imagine, for this particular family, there would be many more schools. There are about 220 dots that would be on there. But the dots for other families have been removed, but the line of best fit has been drawn through them. What they're suggesting as well with the grey zones is that there could be variability in there with the free school meals. As you fluctuate, you could be within that zone. Simply put, above the line, performing better than expected. Below the line, performing less well than expected. That's how you would look. If for the majority of these schools are right in the middle, you would not expect, you would say they're roughly where they should be. These two are performing above. This one is definitely performing below. This one potentially performing below, well, is performing below, but to what extent you would need to ask questions to find out more. What you then have in your pack, and you heard me mention thirds earlier, you've got the cohort divided, and this is the most difficult concept of the lot. You've got the cohort divided into thirds. So if you've got 120 learners in your year group, you would divide them into 3 lots of 40 and say, how well did the top 40 do? How well did the middle 40 do? How well did the lowest 40 do? You've then got, and it is a bit of a mishmash of colours. You've got the upper third in blue, your school. You've got the light blue of the upper third for all the schools in the family, and you've got the third for the local authority as well. The school here is in well above. Yeah, so it's well above that line. The dots blue, orange, that purple are the school. On the upper third of learners, the middle third, the lower third. The key point of learning for this is where you are above or below. You'll see some schools that are above for the most able, above for the middle ability, but well below for the lowest. You would be particularly concerned if you were this school here, right down the bottom, where you are, and the vertical dots are aligned. You're well below for the lowest third. Was your curriculum provision right? Was performance right? Um, this our school is above for all of them, but it is the difference of above the line or below the line that gives you the points above or below. It is complex. It's trying to contextualize and trying to be fair to see where schools are. You will notice also as well, and this is a key point for governors, and this is pretty much true in all families, the greatest variation is amongst the lowest third. Pretty much there's stability in most middle thirds, definitely stability in the upper thirds of how schools vary. And what that shows us is that the most able will do whatever school they're in, and the variance is the least. Schools make the greatest difference to their lowest performing learners who are towards in the lowest third of that family. That chart is exactly the same data, but basically in numerical form. It's really annoying they put a point on it because you don't need the decimal point. You don't need 387.4. It doesn't tell you any more than 387 or 364 for the one below, but those are the numbers that we are looking at. And here, that's how that generates that difference overall. And it generates those 3 differences of 22 points above for the for the upper third, 13 points for the middle third as they perform, 37 above for the lowest third. So performing well above in each. Have a look at those tables. It tells you where your schools are. You have got exactly the same data, but in a table form. I'll explain it quickly, but your school is the one at the bottom, and you can see roughly you've got a third of in each third. They won't always add up to 100 because of rounding. I would be fascinated by family member number 1 in terms of what on earth are they doing right compared with the other schools, because they've got 2/3 of their learners in the most, doing as well as you would expect a third to do. So the bigger the blue on these, the far better your school is performing. You want your reds to be minimized and your blues to be maximized on that, simply put. Any questions at this stage? Sorry, killed you with a little bit of the data there. Hopefully that was clear, but ask more in school about the data that is actually there for schools. So I've covered the top 5, but I've only covered it for the Cap 9 because the literacy measure, the numeracy measure, the science, well, are exactly the same principles. So those charts are repeated. That's where the packs reach 120 pages, because after that, they also have charts which I'll whiz through of family comparisons, male, female, gender, trends, comparisons. Trends. This is the first year of these packs, these revised packs. Therefore, you don't have trends, you just have dots. You are just looking at the comparison of where the school is compared with the family, the local authority, and the Wales average. On this particular example, the school is quite a bit below this is different data from the previous ones. So that's that. You've then got the examples of family comparisons, but by every school. Yeah, so every school is there. What I would be saying here is looking for outliers. So who's above, who's below you. You in the school, by the way, you'd know who these family members are. They're publicly available. So you can see, and it may be, if they're local, it might be leadership teams collaborating and finding out what's been done for those. You've then got male female gender differences. The -50, by the way, I am pretty certain is a single sex school. It's not our school, but it's a single sex school elsewhere in the family. But if you've got large negatives, it means males not doing as well as females relatively. And what you're doing is you're saying, is our gap smaller than the family gap? Is the key element there. That if it's negative, it means boys in that particular indicator doing less well than girls. Similarly, you have trends, but on this one, you don't have trends because we don't have data for the forthcoming years. The next ones are exactly the same, male-female comparisons, but you are looking at the school and every single other school in the family. You will see on this particular one, nearly every school, the girls, the right-hand column, are doing better than the boys, the females doing better than the girls. What you're doing is making sure your gap is less. This gets far more interesting when you're looking at real data in a real pack. And for next year, hopefully, when you are at standards meetings, etc., you will be able to see far more of that. You've got exactly the same principle for free school meals. You haven't got the trends emerging yet, but again, you are looking, is our free school meal gap 48% achieving, sorry, average points 48 for non-free school meals compared with 41 for free school meals. Is that gap smaller or similar to the family? It is in this instance. You then have, surprise, surprise, exactly the same in terms of family, every school in the family in the gaps. What you're looking for is big gaps, such as family member number 8. If you were that school, going, why are our free school meal learners doing only half as well as a non-free school meal when other schools can do better for them? But you'd also be worried about your free school meal non-free school meal learner performance as well, because that's lower than some of the family members as well. It's an unusual way of looking at data for those who analyze data in other fields, but once you get into it, it should be pretty straightforward in terms of asking questions in schools and asking school leaders about it. It's tough though when you're a new governor in it and you're straight into it, and this mandatory training comes at a very early stage. If you do understand it, you may well understand more about elements of these than previous governors who've been there for many years, who have forgotten some of these key concepts as well. So don't think you're the only one as new governors not understanding elements of it. You may well understand a lot more than some of your colleagues. That's just a reminder of what's there, of the ones that I've covered. No qualifications is key. Getting every learner to a qualification. you would want that to be 0. This is a dummy pack and it's artificially 0 for Wales as a whole. It can't be, but you would not want it to be anything above 1% for your school. 10 of, 2 out of 200 learners, there may be some extenuating reasons, but most schools will get learners doing those qualifications earlier. You've then got family comparisons. You can see school doing well. It's 0. It can't do better. These are the takeaway for you of questions that we ask school leadership so you know about them. But questions, what's the highlights from the summer? Are there particular groups of learners that are doing particularly well? Are there particular groups of learners that struggled and didn't perform as well as you expected? Are there any subjects that do? So these questions are equally applicable to you as governors, and I would hope those sort of answers, rather than just the raw data, are coming to you from the school leadership. It's not about just giving you the chart. It's about saying, what does this data tell us? How did this compare to your professional predictions? There's no targets anymore, statutory, but you would expect the school to go, yeah, we expected an average of 380 points for our Cap 9. Did we reach it? No, we were 20 points below. Which third were we below in? What was it impacted by? Any disappointments with question number 6? The key is what you can learn from it as well. Would we change the curriculum, the performance, any particular departments that need further support in the school's priorities moving forward? And key one really for school leaders, how did they hold subject leaders, school leaders to account in terms of item level analysis in the qualifications to see where we can individually improve? So that's a really quick tour of Key Stage 4 data. It's a starter to help you ask more questions in school. Um, uh, that's the key. Might not be the ideal time of year. There may be some data emerging now at governing body meetings, but ask when it is. But it might be on next year's data that is beginning to emerge as well. I'm going to briefly, for those in post-16 school, mention something called ALPS. Many of our schools use it. It's called ALPS because it's Advanced Level Performance System. It's a commercial system used by over 2,000 schools with sixth forms and colleges across the UK. It allows, I say 1,600 on there, it is 2,000 now, to really look at progress. What it does, and I'll show you how it does it, it takes the GCSEs that every learner has, and it predicts how well a learner with that profile would have done in the past, and it says you reach here, you should reach here. It then analyzes, and schools can see, are they on track to get that? Are they going to be above? And then it looks backwards at the end to say how many of our learners in biology achieved above, how many below. The way it then does it, and it's really unusual in education to see a profile like this, but it's unusual that red hot is good, blue cold is not. Okay, it's developed by a scientist who used a thermometer. So rather than seeing green for positives, reds for areas to address, it is the opposite. But basically, if you are 1, it's in the top schools in the UK. 2 is the top 10%. 8 is the bottom 10%, however. If you're in 6, 7, 8, 9, sorry, 7, 8, 9, bottom 25%. 4, 5, 6 is in the average middle percent band. Ultimately, that's all you have to think about. If you get this data presented to you, you'll then get a summary sheet. The ALPS packs are about 70 pages long as well, but you will get a feel for red that's emerging, blue that's cold. The only slight caveat is that for 2021, because the data was more generous on how learners are assessed at A level compared with their GCSEs, you got far more schools emerging with red. They've now, if you've got data for 23, been realigned. Ask more if you're in post-16 schools about ALPS. So in summary, an understanding of how things have significantly changed. End of stage assessments at Key Stage 3 have gone. It's down to the school now to be working with the cluster, supported by the region as a whole, to determine progression assessment. The Key Stage 4 has returned, and I've again left you with some questions to consider beyond the data packs of what you may want to ask when you're back in school, of questions to consider as governors in terms of how you plan, how is school leadership planning for assessment, what information is available for you, how does the school undertake personalised assessments, what are the outcomes of those personalised assessments, tell us, and how are we using that to inform the school development.